New at 5, a controversial move by President Obama. In his final days in office, he has granted clemency to WikiLeaks leaker Chelsea Manning.
At 5:05 this morning, new from overnight, in one of his last acts as president, Donald Trump issued a long list of pardons.
Now, therefore, I, Gerald R. Ford, President of the United States, pursuant to the pardon power conferred upon me by Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution, have granted, and by these presents do grant, a full, free, and absolute pardon unto Richard Nixon.
CNN has learned President Biden will pardon his son Hunter Biden.
On December 1st, 2024, President Joe Biden issued a presidential pardon for his son, Hunter, who had been convicted of federal gun charges and had pleaded guilty to federal tax charges. It is the latest in a long history of controversial presidential pardons dating back to our first president, George Washington. Welcome back. In this video, I will examine the history of presidential pardons and some of the most notable and controversial ones before discussing Hunter Biden's pardon. First, we must examine the power to grant pardons. The power is derived from the U.S. Constitution and Article 2, Section 2, which states, in part, the President shall have the power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States except in cases of impeachment. Since then, thousands of pardons and commutations have been issued, starting with George Washington, who issued 16 during his 2 terms, to Franklin Roosevelt, who issued nearly 3,700, to Jimmy Carter, who issued a pardon for draft dodgers that applied to over 200,000 people, which I will discuss in more detail later. The presidential power to pardon and commute sentences is one of the broadest powers of the presidency. It is one that has the least oversight as well. The only stipulation to the power of the pardon is that it only applies to federal crimes and that it can't be used on impeached officials, since impeachment is a legislative process to bring charges against government officials. There is no means of judicial review, congressional oversight, or any way to appeal the pardon. Therefore, the president has the power to pardon or commute the sentence of whomever they want for whatever reason they may desire. They can also pardon people for crimes they have not been charged with, such as Gerald Ford's pardon of former President Richard Nixon, another case I will cover later in this video. Most presidents have relied on various executive branch offices to provide legal advice and recommendations when issuing pardons. Today, that advice comes from the Office of the Pardon Attorney, which is part of the Department of Justice. This provides a formal process for applying for clemency. According to the Office of the Pardon Attorney's website, the office receives, reviews, and investigates applications for executive clemency and provides advice and recommendations to the President. The office also prepares the formal documents the President signs when issuing pardons. Still, despite this relatively formal process, choosing who does or does not receive clemency rests with the President alone. During his first term, for example, President Trump elected to pardon individuals connected to him without consulting the Office of the Pardon Attorney. While thousands of pardons have been granted, some stand out far more than others for their controversial nature, and I'd like to examine them now. As I stated in the intro, the controversy started with our very first president, George Washington. While President Washington only issued 16 pardons, several were issued to individuals who participated in the Whiskey Rebellion in the 1790s, one of the first significant challenges to our fledgling federal government's power. In more recent history, Gerald Ford's decision to pardon Richard Nixon for any crimes he may have committed as president from his inauguration on January 20th, 1969 to his resignation on August 9th, 1974 was highly controversial at the time. President Ford's press secretary resigned in protest of the pardon, and critics accused the president of having struck a deal with Nixon where Nixon resigned from the presidency in exchange for Ford issuing him a pardon. President Ford denied this accusation, but the controversy played a significant role in Ford's defeat in the 1976 election. Ford's successor, Jimmy Carter, would find himself in controversy on his first full day in office. President Carter's first official act as president was his decision to pardon all those who had evaded the draft during the Vietnam War. The unconditional pardon applied to over 200,000 people. It was unpopular at the time, but Carter had promised to issue the pardon during his presidential campaign and saw it as a way to help the country move on from Vietnam. While Carter issued his draft dodger pardon at the beginning of his presidency, President Bill Clinton issued two of his most controversial pardons just before leaving office on January 20th, 2001. The first of these was issued to Mark Rich, who had violated numerous U.S. laws in the late 70s and early 80s by trading with Iran while there was an ongoing embargo against the country. Rich had fled to Switzerland to avoid being brought to justice. The pardon was controversial because Mark Rich's ex-wife had donated large sums of money to the Democratic Party, Hillary Clinton's Senate campaign, and the Clinton Library Foundation. These revelations would lead to an official investigation that found no wrongdoing by President Clinton. The second of President Clinton's controversial last-minute pardons was of his half-brother, Roger Clinton. Roger had been convicted of federal drug charges related to the possession and distribution of cocaine. While it was not the first time a president had pardoned a relative, Roger was arrested shortly after for a DUI that he later pleaded guilty to. President Donald Trump issued numerous controversial pardons during his first term in office. Pardons were issued to close allies such as Paul Manafort, Roger Stone, and Steve Bannon. Another thing that has regained the headlines recently is the pardon issued to Charles Kushner, the father of Jared Kushner and the husband of Donald Trump's daughter Ivanka. After winning the 2024 election, Trump announced his intention to nominate Charles Kushner as the U.S. ambassador to France. Trump also has promised to pardon those who participated in the January 6, 2020 riots at the U.S. Capitol, which will also bring with it even more controversy. This brings us to Hunter Biden's pardon by his father, President Joe Biden, on December 1st, 2024. Hunter had been convicted on federal gun charges in June of 2024 for lying on his firearm application about his drug addiction problem. He also pleaded guilty to federal tax violations for over $1.4 million in unpaid taxes. The pardon comes after months of President Joe Biden denying any intent to pardon his son.
Let me ask you, will you accept the jury's outcome, their verdict, no matter what it is?
Yes.
And have you ruled out a pardon for your son?
Yes.
The pardon also covers more than just the criminal cases in which Hunter Biden is already involved. The pardon also covers any crimes committed by Hunter from January 1st, 2014 to December 1st, 2024, giving him broad protection from any further federal charges for that time period. The pardon has been criticized heavily by the Republicans and President-elect Donald Trump, with them accusing Biden of blatantly lying to the American people, as well as breaking with norms and the rule of law. Reactions among Democrats and other left-leaning sources have been mixed, with some praising the decision as a father protecting his son, and others critical of the move. Some of this criticism has included accusing President Biden of abusing his office's powers for his family's benefit, something President Biden and other Democrats have accused Trump of doing in the past and likely going to do in his second term. President Biden defended his decision in a statement, saying that the charges against Hunter were politically motivated and that, quote, "No reasonable person who looks at the facts of Hunter's cases can reach any other conclusion than Hunter was singled out only because he is my son, and that is wrong." Other Democrats have also pointed out President-elect Trump's legal troubles, as well as his use of the pardon in the past to help those close to him. In the comments, let me know whether you agree with President Biden's decision to pardon his son and your thoughts on some of these other controversial pardons from our past. I'll link to my various sources in the description below, so please leave a like if you found this video informative, and in the meantime, I'll see you on the next one.